Hey, it's Kay, and this is Skittles, Head of Development. Today is going to be a bit of a heavy one. We're going to talk about the circulation of videos showing police violence online. If you use any social media, particularly if you follow and engage with people who discuss politics, I do not recommend this. You've probably seen videos at least a couple times showing someone being horribly beaten, if not killed, by police. I know I've seen a lot. Most recently, and with an especially high profile, was the video of Tyre Nichols being beaten by police, a beating he would die from in hospital a few days later. I am not going to be showing any footage like that in this video, and not just because YouTube would annihilate me from orbit, but also because I think we can, often with the best of intentions, be over-eager to share footage like that. And I get it. There have been countless cases of police outright lying in their statements after killing someone, only to be contradicted by footage released after the fact. Infamously, the Minneapolis Police Department's statement after Officer Chauvin killed George Floyd by kneeling on his neck did not mention said kneeling at all, only updating it after footage was released to the public showing it. Often, that footage alone is not sufficient to so much as see the officers responsible fired. In fact, they tried to put Chauvin on paid leave at first, before quickly buckling to public outcry. Usually, even footage that very clearly shows what happened has to be supported by significant enough public unrest that it becomes untenable to protect those cops, and the department cuts them loose. It's interesting that the officers who murdered Tyre Nichols were promptly fired and charged, perhaps indicating that police departments are getting better at seeing the writing on the wall after the summer of 2020 and the enormous unrest sparked by George Floyd's murder. Or just that it quickly became clear there was no conceivable way they could spin this one. It's bad. But don't go thinking that some departments being smarter in their response to these things mean the police are killing fewer people. That number has actually only gone up since 2020. And in 2022, police killed more people than in any year since these stats started being recorded in 2013. This is a problem that is escalating. So, at this point, we might conclude that widely sharing footage of police violence is a moral good. It activates the public, it helps secure consequences for officers who hurt and kill people, and it helps bring the truth to light even when departments try to cover it up. Police violence is getting worse, so citizens who want to keep each other safe have to be more vigilant, right? Well, there's some complications here that we need to think about. For one, footage of police violence can also be weaponized against victims. There are tactics police deploy, often fully aware that their body camera footage might be used to scrutinize them to make their actions appear justified, further muddying the waters when trying to determine if spreading footage of a police interaction is helping or hindering efforts to hold police to account. Here to talk about that is Phil from That Dang Dad, a former cop who has a lot of valuable insights into how the police operate.
For cops, information control is a big part of the job. When I was on, I often knew more than I let on to suspects, victims, witnesses, and so on, either to catch them in a lie or to influence how they behaved. So when the police release a video, you have to wonder about what wasn't released. And while it's certainly possible that a well-funded department could digitally alter a video, it doesn't even really have to go that far. A video can be clipped to start at a certain time that makes the civilian look bad and hides the cop escalating an encounter. It can be cropped to hide the actions of an officer just outside of the frame. And often, multiple angles are available, so the video they choose to release will have the angle that best hides the bad police behaviors. Business owners and residents often volunteer security footage to the police department, so it's important to ask whether other footage is being kept back that the police would rather you didn't see. If you've ever heard an officer giving commands to a civilian while assaulting them, it's because we were trained to do so. Witnesses remember hearing, "Stop fighting me," or "Stop resisting," which can look better for the cop in a later trial. Also, when they hear that, it can color their perception of the incident. Fights are chaotic and confusing, so hearing "stop resisting" helps your mind make sense of what's happening, even if that sense is incorrect. Police officers will also often frequently goad civilians into getting upset or making a move in order to justify a beating. Cops will whisper insults that only a civilian can hear, so it looks like the civilian just freaks out. And during a tense arrest, police officers will sometimes pinch and poke or use joint manipulation on the people that they're arresting in order to make them flinch, justifying a beatdown. I knew one cop that when he saw fellow officers wrestling with a civilian, he would join the fight and then grab and squeeze the person's testicles in order to make them involuntarily twist away, justifying an even harder beating. These techniques are really hard to see on camera, but the civilian twisting or recoiling is very easy to see on camera. Thanks to decades of propaganda on TV, most civilians, and especially most people on juries, want to believe that police are generally doing the right thing. So we have to be careful with footage of police incidents, and especially police body cam footage, because just the fact that people are seeing a person in a police encounter can subtly prejudice them against the civilian. We can't assume that any footage, especially body cam footage, is just neutral or speaks for itself. I've read some studies that imply that because body cam footage is first person, it can make juries see themselves as the cop rather than treat the footage like an objective record. Also, some studies seem to indicate that for people with pre-existing biases, body cam footage only reinforces those biases regardless of the actual events captured. There's also evidence that even stuff like distance from the event being captured can influence how people perceive the participants, with very close-up footage possibly biasing the viewer against the target of the footage. Lastly, for me, it's worth being sensitive to the fact that some communities only get the prestige of being on TV when it's via footage of them on their worst days in encounters with the police. Even if the footage invites sympathy, there's this kind of othering effect that happens sometimes. Oh, those poor people over there. It's just so sad that these kinds of things happen over there. That kind of tragedy tourism still lets the good, law-abiding viewer at home hold these communities at kind of an arm's length, instead of seeing them as neighbors and fellow residents capable of enjoying the wide spectrum of human experience available out there. It can be easy to dehumanize the people that we see in police encounters when our only exposure to them is in sensationalized battle footage. We have to be proactive about connecting with our wider community so that we remember. People aren't theoretical, they aren't abstractions, they are human beings worthy of dignity and respect.
Thanks, Phil. The impact on overpoliced communities, particularly the Black community in this case, is another important side of this discussion that needs to be considered. Sharing an image of racialized violence means exposing people to that image. Imagine scrolling through your Twitter timeline and just seeing the same video of a man who looks like you being killed again and again and again. Many of you won't need to imagine that was what the summer of 2020 was like for a lot of people. It's worth asking before you share a video like that if the people following you are probably also following other people who've been posting it all day. Do they need to see it that 20th time? Is that going to make them more opposed to police violence than the 19th time? And we can't ignore the history of racial violence as spectacle here. Lynchings in America during slavery, and in fact ramping up after abolition in the Jim Crow era, were public events. The act of hanging victims from trees meant that their bodies served as a highly visible reminder of racial hierarchy. Often the bodies would have notes attached to them, warning others, especially any Black others, not to take the body down before a certain time, else they might incur the same fate. The point was to terrorize, to show the local Black community what would happen if they stepped out of line. Often, stepping out of line meant trying to escape slavery, being perceived to have spoken out of turn to a white woman, a motivation for lynching that actually became far more popular after abolition. That's a story for another time. And very often, a lynching victim will have done nothing at all, but they will likely be accused of any manner of violent crime. But as lynchings became a more frequent occurrence in the Jim Crow South, technology was transforming it. When once the body of a lynching victim might be left in a visible area in town for the locals to see, newspapers allowed the stories of these murders to circulate widely. But more than that, they provided a platform to establish a narrative. With incredible consistency, newspaper articles on lynchings would insist that the lynching victim fully confessed to whatever crimes they were accused of before being killed. How convenient. The police who murdered Tyre Nichols can be heard ordering him to put his hands behind his back, unaware of a street camera that showed clearly that they were pinning his arms. This is a common practice since we started putting cameras on the police, cameras that are often obscured in a struggle. If you shout "stop resisting" and nobody can really see what's happening, well, it's easy to assume the person was resisting, like Phil said earlier. Just like those lynching articles, we're provided these reassurances that the violence being carried out is legitimate, justified in some way. The advent of radio around the turn of the 19th century allowed faster reporting than ever on lynchings, often even putting out calls to nearby towns to come participate. Hunts for lynching victims would be advertised, calling for support. Lynchings would sometimes be scheduled. Train operators began charting special train services specifically to bring spectators and participants to lynchings from nearby towns. As a result, we see the crowds at these events growing larger and larger. This wasn't just about terrorizing the black population, but entertaining the white population. And one of the technologies that had the most important impact on this terrible practice was the camera. Photographs of lynchings testify to the size of the crowds some of these murders attracted, with men and women alike seen gleefully spectating. Horrific photographs of lynching victims would be sold as postcards, like souvenirs from a carnival. I actually did quite a bit of research into this for my history degree, meaning I saw a lot of these postcards. While seeing death is never nice, if I'm being honest, the thing that will stay with me for as long as I live might not be the mutilated bodies of the victims, but the smiling white faces of the audience. Grace Elizabeth Hale wrote about the increasing nature of lynchings as mass entertainment, as a transformation that also heightened the terror experienced by the black community, saying, "It was not necessary to look to be terrorized by the spectacle of lynching. It was enough to know that thousands of others looked and were amused." And anything the radio or cameras did, the internet, as it does, has done exponentially larger and faster. The ritualized and highly public murder of black victims is not usually carried out by white vigilante mobs anymore, but rather by sanctioned enforcers of the state. Therefore, it is understandable that many share footage like this not with the intention of harming anyone, but with the intention of raising awareness and holding police accountable. Again, without videos like these, the officers in question would probably not have received so much as a stern warning. We can only speculate about how often things like this happen, and we never see or hear about it. In 2022, US police were killing about 100 people every month. But it's nothing short of traumatizing to communities that face the greatest violence from the police. Nobody needs to see footage of people being murdered again and again flashing in their face, especially not when that person looks like you, when you already know that any interaction you have with the police could turn into that if you're unlucky. For the love of God, talk about it. Go to protests. Learn about abolition and the critiques of this messed up system that people have been making since before you or I were born. Don't do nothing. But doing something doesn't have to mean sharing around this kind of footage without thinking first. And the spirit of the gleeful lynching spectator lives on in right-wing message boards like 4chan, who, whenever something like the killing of Tyre Nichols happens, can be seen sharing around the video explicitly for entertainment. And sometimes people will write about sites like 4chan and 8chan, or whatever it's calling itself these days, as if they were these secretive, clandestine meetings of extremists. But they're just websites you can go to. And they're full of deeply unwell people being pushed towards reactionary violence by outright fascists. And they love to have a laugh at a good video of a black man being brutalized by cops. It desensitizes them to violence. It often reifies their sense of racial superiority. It serves many of the same social functions as sharing photos and stories of lynchings. As Hale says, looking is not a neutral act. I didn't make this video to scold anyone, and definitely not to discourage you getting angry and talking to others about why you're angry when shit like this happens. I made it to encourage people to think twice when handling material like this and consider if you're treating it responsibly. Tyre Nichols was a father and an artist. I've seen a lot of people saying they wish people would share his work rather than footage of him being murdered. I think repeatedly seeing police violence like that, after a while, it starts to just make you sad and scared, not inspired to go out and do something about it. So maybe let this inspire you. This is the creative work of a human being who people cared about, who was taken from those people by an unaccountable institution for no fucking reason. Seeing this should push you to question the police as an institution as much, if not more, than videos of their abuse. This man is dead because this institution has been allowed to operate with impunity for so long, and so are many others. There will always be problems. There will always be people that need help and conflicts that need resolving. But the systems we have in place just don't do that. And the consequences of refusing to imagine a world without an armed gang keeping people in line and picking out the occasional victim for their own violent satisfaction are too high a price to pay. If this sounds totally crazy to you, I completely understand. I would really invite you to give Alex Vitale's book a try. I've recommended it on the channel before. I really think it's a great introduction to a lot of these ideas. Give it a try and see what you think. We can't just keep going on like this. It's getting worse, and nothing will change unless regular people, and a lot of them, make it change. Thanks for watching, everyone. Patrons voted on a video about solitary confinement, and that is coming. I just wanted to make a quick video about this. It felt like the right time, and I hope I had something worthwhile to contribute. If you want to vote on video topics, as well as getting extra pieces of writing and videos of Skittles, as well as supporting the channel, go check out the Patreon. See you next time.